Welcome to the Sales Scholars Podcast, where we talk to academic experts about anything and everything sales related. Well, today we're excited to welcome to the show Dan Strunk from DePaul University. Now, Dan is the executive in residence and the managing director of the Center for Sales Leadership at DePaul. And today we engage in a lively conversation around collaboration, building trust, and working with partners to find success. Now, Dan is a category management expert. He's written multiple articles and published a variety of things on the topic of organizations working together, and he shares what he's learned today with us on the podcast. Dan, thanks for joining us today.
Well, thank you very much for allowing me to speak, Craig. I'm very excited to share with you my perspective on what's happening in sales today.
Great. I appreciate the time. I know DePaul University has a long track record of just outstanding work in the sales space. So this conversation is going to be a ton of fun. So I think the place I always like to start with our guest is just tell us a little bit about the work you do as a managing director for the sales leadership program at DePaul, and then how'd you get into the academic world?
Of course. Let me talk a little bit about how I got involved, and then we'll surely talk about DePaul. First and foremost, I've always been interested in academia. As a young account executive in an ad agency in Philadelphia in 1979, I taught my first class at Immaculata College. It was Advertising 101, and what I learned is that I really loved teaching, but it didn't pay the bills. So for the next 20 years, I progressed through my career in terms of the typical steps leading to a consulting career after managing a variety of businesses. So at the end of that 20-year period in 1997, again, a year with sevens, when I controlled my time because I was running a consulting organization, I applied for a faculty position at DePaul. Began as an adjunct faculty member in 1997, and then was offered a full-time teaching position in 2000. So it was a labor of love. I learned that teaching was for me, and to date I've taught most of the courses in the undergraduate and graduate curriculum. But I think I received the greatest satisfaction teaching consumer behavior, sales strategy, and category management. I think consumer behavior because it explains how people think and how people react. The thing about consumer behavior is if you can understand how people learn, then you can teach. And that's much about what's going on in the sales and marketing space, is understanding how people learn and speaking to them appropriately. Of course, along the way in my academic career, I found time to write 2 textbooks and 2 simulations for sales, as well as.
I like how you say that, Dan. I found time to write. Oh, no big deal. A couple of textbooks and some simulations. That's great.
Well, it was part and parcel of what I wanted to teach, because as we teach sales strategy and technology, which is a course I created at DePaul, it was necessary to create the materials around it. What we found is that when we created the sales center in 2004, after being invited by 3M, there weren't any appropriate materials. We had to create our own.
I appreciate you sharing some of that perspective. We're always fascinated about the way that people got into the academic world. And it seems like it's always a curvy road, no straight road.
It wasn't for me. It was, but there's a line that says a funny thing happened on the way to the forum. I really loved teaching. I love the students. We've helped so many students find their way into business careers, and it's so satisfying.
Yeah, no, that's great. Well, look, I know we had talked about the idea that you do a lot of research in the category management space. And so you have this unique view of how organizations work together, particularly buyers and sellers. And so I'm curious what you found makes for strong organizational collaboration.
So in 2013, along with 2 amazing colleagues, Dr. Nina Diamond and Dr. Marina Herju, we were really intrigued about the difficulty companies were having in collaborating. And what we learned was the language was different. and that companies had different terminology. So the first thing we had to do was eliminate confusion. We tried to identify how people referred to category management before we got to collaboration. Once we understood that, we tried to conclude and determine what was meant by the term collaboration, because again, what's in a word? The DePaul study actually proved to be a precursor to Catman 2.0, which was an effort to organize and delineate category management practice in today's terms. So the first thing we learned was that companies refer to category management as a variety of platforms. It's a knowledge platform. It's a way for companies to interrelate based on account and business understanding. It was also a relationship platform. It was a relationship for sellers to maintain relationships with buyers once they began to understand that particular motivation. Once again, it's getting back to how do you listen actively to begin to develop a complete story about what salespeople and what their customers think. So much of what's done in category management is done by a category management group, but communicated through a sales group. So that terminology, that understanding is key. It's also a process platform because companies use this platform, this 8-step process, if you will, to exchange ideas and understand what's expected of products. And finally, it's a terminology platform. I've already said Catman. Well, there are a number of acronyms. There's business jargon and shorthand used by companies in the practice of shelf, aisle, and inventory management, which is really what category management is, in order to effectively work together. Secondly, we learned that category management was also referred to as a funnel. And in that funnel, it's to distill data, once distilled, to organize it into information, and once established as information, to organize it once more to create insight. And that insight is what we talk about today, which is driving business. It's the sales analytics that create direction for companies. We answer questions of what, so what, and now what. What data is pertinent, and what do we have to mine in order for us to be able to understand this problem? So what says, what did we learn? What are we going to do now that we understand the problem from this point of view? What does it mean? What difference does it make? And in reality, when we talk about now what, which is the third element in this trilogy, what, so what, and now what direction should we proceed in? That's about insight. How does it benefit both partners? More importantly, how does it benefit the shopper? And this is the first time I've introduced the term shopper, but we'll talk more about that in just a second. Once we've defined Catman and what it really meant, then we turned and said, well, why isn't collaboration as effective as it could be? And we found out that collaboration, once again, means two things. It means harmonization or synchronization of efforts, but it also serves as a barometer about the success of a relationship. I suspect, Craig, that you've had a performance review in your life. I've had many of them.
Yep.
But each time I've had a performance review, I really didn't need the review. I knew exactly where I stood. And it's that feeling, it's that understanding about where we are and how we're performing. That's what the barometer is all about. It's about what assignments are you being given? Are you being given serious respect when you come and you talk? Those assignments lead to a connection in trust between buyer and seller that's absolutely essential to creating this collaborative effort, collaborative framework. Because here's what we learned. We learned prerequisites for team success are respect and trust. And you learn that, and you learn how you're working there based on the feeling that you have within the buyer-seller relationship. It's willingness to share information and get you involved in their business problems. one of the prerequisites is strong analytical skills, and that value is created by understanding a particular category. Remember, if you're a retailer, you may have 15 or 20 categories that you're responsible for. But if you're a manufacturer, you are expert in one particular category, maybe two. But it's that ability to specialize that gives you the opportunity and also creates the willingness for the retailer to share this space and their problems with you. It's a mutual dependence in order to create success. When we think about best practices, it's what our partner is willing to share with us. It's our skills and our ability to create insight that long-term leads to business action, which leads to success.
Gotcha. Hey, Dan, I'm curious because I'm a former retailer,
Right.
Worked with a number of manufacturers. And one of the distinct differences, I think, with our organization and some of our partners early on was we were sharing information with our partners. Actually, probably we were doing it before the industry that we were in was really doing it.
Sure.
But we would often get people who are, have anxiety about sharing information with your suppliers. Like, what would you tell organizations who would say, "Hey, Dan, I'm not comfortable sharing stuff"?
Okay, so it's a bit about accepting help. Okay, so it isn't so much the data, because data in aggregate, you can discern what that information's about. If I really want to understand what Kroger's doing and I look at the businesses surrounding them, I have a pretty good understanding of what Kroger's volume is like. What I need is for my partner to feel comfortable with me, that collaboration, that ability to create value in managing the data. So you've got to earn that trust. Yeah, it's trust, but it's performance when you have the data to work with. It's coming back and saying to them, there are some obvious directions for you to proceed in order to be more successful. And it isn't about share anymore. It's more successful in serving your customers. So it's really all about the shopper, their customers, and improving relationships. That's the foundation that earns the trust.
That's a really good perspective, that if you can shift the perspective where it should be on the customer,
right,
then that puts two organizations, if it's retailer and supplier, or manufacturer through wholesaler, whatever it looks like, but it puts them on the kind of, for lack of a better term, the same side of the table.
It does. Well, they've got to be working for the same thing. What matters is that both partners are committed to the other's success, to serving the shopper first and foremost. The rest of it will fall into place, especially where you're creating value. You don't give people assignments that don't have the ability to solve your problems. You rely on people that have been successful in the past serving your needs. And that's what I mean by you've got to earn the respect, and that respect will lead to trust.
Yeah.
I hope I answered your question.
No, you did. In my mind, if you're in a field that maybe doesn't fully apply a category management strategy, the
Right.
concept of, dedicated people or a, cross-functional or cross-organizational group who's going to take data for the sake of analysis and improving the customer relationship. Like, you could apply that in just about any organization and strengthen your collaboration and your partnership, and you hope create more value for the customer.
We all have to learn how to get together. That collaboration inside is critical in order for you to create value with your marketing and sales team.
Yeah. No, I can see that for sure. And I know you mentioned a couple times this idea of insights. And I know when we first started talking, you had mentioned that DePaul was doing some work had introduced some an analytics course before, like, say, analytics was cool.
Right.
I'm curious what you've seen on the insight side, where you have seen organizations use insights to affect their selling process.
When we think about shopper behavior, it's an evolution, because we call this consumer-centric category management. Today we call it shopper behavior, and it's shopper-centric category management, and it's shopper insights and marketing. It's all about the shopper in the distinction between consumer and shopper. Shoppers behave in a particular fashion. And of course, we know the base distinction between a consumer, which is the individual that consumes the product, versus a shopper who is the individual that purchases the product. As I said initially, consumer behavior is one of my favorites because it tells me how people learn so that I can teach. In this instance, shopper insights are looking for those key characteristics of what leads to a buy. And they want to be able to understand that from interaction with the product on the shelf, whether it's packaging or the number of facings on the shelf. What they're interested in is, how do I work with this particular brand? How does the shopper think about value at time of purchase? And what do we learn from that interaction? Well, we've got some pretty large databases. Why shoppers behave in a particular fashion is collected by frequent shopper club cards. Okay, so whether it's Sam's Club, as you walk out the door, you've got a scan and go, and that provides utility. That UPC on the side of that package has led us to gathering a very significant amount of data. Walmart, Kroger, Walgreens, just to name a few of the leading companies, have purchase history information at a household level. And that goes back years. The power of that information has to be released to enrich shopper experience. There are companies that have been formed to do that, just that, to mine that data. Companies like dunnhumby and 8451, which is a derivation of dunnhumby, another group of data mining specialists who focus their time on trying to find what makes shoppers act. So analytics, BI, augmented intelligence, those are the elements that are going to lead CPG interest into the future of shopper marketing. How we work with those, how we work with the Alteryx or Tableau. Alteryx, which is an analytics program that allows you to combine disparate data sources to reveal an insight, or it's the ability to look at a set of data, realize what it is, and then put a conclusion to it, which is augmented intelligence. That's what we're going to face in order to lead CPG sales into the future, and in order to lead marketing into the future. It's this focus on shopper, understanding how they behave, how we can add value to their particular requirements or needs at point of retail. And we've got a whole new set of media to work within. Our telephones are perhaps one of the ultimate means for us to influence shopper behavior at point of purchase.
Yeah. I'm curious, Dan, if let's say that I'm in an organization where maybe we're not as sophisticated as some of the bigger companies you and I have talked, we've talked a little bit about here, but I really want to begin to capture some insight on my shoppers and then potentially draw some conclusions. Like, what type of recommendations would you give me on how I could do that?
Okay, so there are a number of organizations that will help you if you don't have the sophistication. The acquisition of the data can be done if you are a partner of that trading company. Let's use Walgreens as an example. Walgreens will give their category captain or a category validator, or having a special relationship with an organization. Information is shared, but you've got to have data. Then you've got to have people to manage that data. So oftentimes companies with limited resources will move to a consulting organization to help them to generate that. To do it yourself is going to take a lot of time, and quite honestly, unless you have a company like Nielsen or a company like IRI to give you the foundations of shopper behavior in diary information or in sales panel information. It's going to be very difficult for you. Secure data first, understand what the size of your problem is and what you'd like to accomplish. Decide whether you can do it yourself or whether you have to involve some special expertise in order to be able to compete with those people who can do it themselves. Because it's a very interesting universe today. Most companies have been in a situation, we've seen tremendous consolidation in our industry. There are very few companies today that are so small that they don't have an opportunity to understand which way.
Yeah. Well, and it seems like too that there's been some pretty good advances in technology, and just a lot more competitors in every field that probably gives even smaller organizations a chance. To your point, it's like, well, look, get the data, and then you
Right.
can work with people to help. No one, I mean,
Getting the data, correct. Getting the data is the first step. Finding the people's the next step.
yeah. No, that's a good it's a good order to put it in. Well, I know you've been working on this topic for quite a while. I'm curious as to over the past 5 years or so, like what are some of the more significant consumer behavioral changes that you have seen that companies really need to be aware of?
Well, I think the trends are fairly well reported in CPG, but we've had recession, we've had COVID, we've seen times of economic advantage, we've seen times of economic disadvantage. We know that private labels have benefited tremendously during the COVID period. Just think about the availability of the paper products. And what's happened is we've had an oversampling. Interesting phenomenon. We have had an oversampling of those private label products because some of the brand name products weren't on the shelf. As a result, we've seen some changes in consumer purchase behavior in terms of how it affects the typical reaction to nationally branded items versus private label items. That's one element that's occurred. The ability to reach shoppers technically via media and their media appetites as generations have changed. We're now talking to millennials who are as comfortable at using the phone and receiving offers on the fly. But previous generations weren't that way. So it was an intrusion in their shopping purchase habits.
Yeah. It's funny. Yeah, I guess the way of the coupon in the newspaper and the mailer is going away, and that was where I got my promotions.
You and I are of similar periods. Yes, indeed. Coupons were a major passion of mine for quite some time. Long ago in a faraway galaxy, I introduced a program called Quaker Direct, which was household coded variably valued incentives. And that was where we first began to do what we called household management, or Peppers and Rogers called one-to-one marketing. So yes, it's a whole different day today to promote. And that's the other thing that I think is important, is to understand that shopper marketing has become as important as the national programming that we once enjoyed. Think about industry consolidation and how Kroger has continued to purchase other banners in the country, and Safeway has done the same. We now have companies that once had 12% of the ACV, now with 19% of the ACV. When you get a company that large and you promote through the company, through a shopper marketing, an account-specific marketing program, you get the same impact, if not more impact, than we would get in national programming before. So I think another trend is the attack on these national budgets to secure work with major retail customers, and I think that's also changed.
Yeah, that's interesting how much change has happened in just the past, what it's been now 6 months. but so much of the change seeming to be in areas that are likely to stay with us for a period of time. I mean, the technology thing that you had mentioned is one of those things that the COVID effect seems to have just accelerated multiple things that were already in place and now ingrained them in organizations where I don't know that they'll go back to some of the things they used to do.
Exactly, and that's what we're concluding right now with private label sales and alternative choices, because this oversampling has led people to change purchase behavior.
Yeah, that's a great, I think a great observation for sure, and a great trend that people need to pay attention to, particularly if you're in a consumer product space that had ran into a supply issue, which there are a lot of them. It's having a big change.
Not just paper. Yeah, not just paper. And it's also helped some of the foundational products, peanut butter. It's helped all of these staples that are center aisle in grocery, that have been staples and have been moving out of favor with consumers because of fats, because of calories, but all of those products were available, comfort food in home. Some of those products have received pretty nice bumps in sales.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody in the CPG space is hurting in terms of volume. I think some of the inventory problems have created difficulties in profitability for them, but certainly not on the sales line, I don't think.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Well, look, Dan, we are at the end of our show, but I can't tell you how much we appreciate the time you've given us and what we talked about. Great stuff.
Well, I appreciate it so much, Craig. It's been a pleasure to have you talk.
Yeah, no, it was great. Thanks again for being on the show.